Apparently not everything. We've got indications from the Department of Justice that there are things that are going to be withheld, at least, or handed out at a later date. Now, the law in this case that was passed by Congress and signed by President Trump required that all the Epstein files be released by midnight tonight, Friday, December 19th.
The Minnesota IC shooting story isn't a clean, settled case. It's a chain of incidents where official narratives, video evidence, and legal outcomes keep colliding in uncomfortable ways. In January 2026, multiple encounters in Minneapolis, including the killing of Renee Good and the shooting of Julio Cesar Sosasilis, sparked national outrage and immediate claims of self-defense from federal authorities. But those claims have since been challenged by newly surfaced footage and inconsistencies in testimony. Most recently, surveillance video contradicted the original account given by...
And that's fair. And when it came to Maxwell, it was about the idea, right, they would bring these girls in and then they would have them recruit other girls. And that was kind of the network that was being built up. From a prosecutorial point of view, from a legal point of view, somebody's looking at this and saying, wait a minute, I'm looking at these filings and they're identifying certain people or they're redacting certain other people. And they say, there's not enough evidence to charge this person or limited evidence regarding involvement. What does that mean? So for a layperson...
IC agents in the Sosasilis case, showing a far shorter and less violent confrontation than initially described. That discrepancy was serious enough that federal prosecutors dropped charges against the men involved after weeks in custody, and 2 agents were placed under investigation for potentially giving false statements. What makes the situation more troubling is not just the shooting itself, but the timeline. Authorities reportedly had access to the video early on, yet proceeded with charges anyway, raising questions about whether evidence was ignored or mishandled. Local officials have openly criticized the lack of transparency, and federal investigations are now examining possible misconduct, including perjury. So this isn't a story where facts emerged quickly and accountability followed. It's a case where the truth appears to have surfaced slowly, through external pressure, conflicting evidence, and public scrutiny, leaving open questions about credibility, process, and whether the system corrects itself.
If you tend towards cynicism or skepticism, you might wonder, is everything about Epstein and his powerful male friends, is that coming out? That remains to be seen.
Only after damage is already done. During the federal investigation of Jeffrey Epstein, prosecutor Marie Villafana did consult with fellow prosecutor Bruce Reinhart about legal strategy, even though he wasn't formally assigned to the case. According to records, Reinhart disclosed he was best friends with defense attorney Jack Goldberger, and around that same period he registered a private practice at the exact same office address and suite as Goldberger, an address also linked to Epstein's Florida Science Foundation, which was used in connection with his work release arrangement. Shortly after leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office in early 2008, Reinhart began representing Epstein's associates, and financial records later showed payments from Epstein-linked accounts to his firm totaling tens of thousands of dollars. However, there is no confirmed evidence that Reinhart was simultaneously working on the prosecution while being paid by Epstein, and he has maintained he was not directly involved in the case itself, making the situation ethically controversial but legally unproven as misconduct. The deal that made everything possible was the 2007 to 2008 non-prosecution agreement that let Jeffrey Epstein plead guilty only to state-level charges while avoiding federal prosecution for far more serious crimes. In return, he served about 13 months in the Palm Beach County Jail under an unusually lenient work release program that allowed him to leave custody for most of each day, 6 days a week, to go to his office, an arrangement later criticized because records and testimony showed he continued.
The Maxwell interview is and never was part of the Epstein files. She was sentenced in 2025. This was an interview by Trump's lawyer to protect Trump from the fallout about the Epstein files. What this really is nothing but a sketchy PR stunt by the Department of Justice. And we have seen this movie before. The Maxwell interview is to the Epstein files what the Barr letter was to the Mueller investigation.
Meeting young women during that period despite being under supervision. Years later, the fallout from that deal continued to echo, including scrutiny of figures like Ghislaine Maxwell, who was convicted in 2021 for a role in facilitating Epstein's abuse network. Reports that she was later interviewed extensively by U.S. officials as part of ongoing information-gathering efforts sparked backlash, especially from those connected to victims like Virginia Giuffre, who had long accused powerful individuals of abuse. The core issue tying all of this together is not just what happened decades ago, but how a combination of prosecutorial decisions, jail privileges, and later investigative choices create a perception that accountability has been uneven, where institutional actions, even when legally justified, continue to clash with public expectations of justice.
Again, there was new names in some of the emails that I think investigators need to look at. In particular, I jumped on the name of a modeling agent who, in a similar fashion to Jean-Luc Brunel, who brought underage girls from overseas to Jeffrey Epstein for abuse. There was another man. What was interesting about this other individual is that he also apparently provided young models for Donald Trump's modeling agency.
What the released materials appear to challenge is the long-standing public account given by Prince Andrew about his 2010 trip to see Jeffrey Epstein. Because while he repeatedly said the visit was solely to end their relationship, reported emails and scheduling records suggest a far more extended and socially active stay, including time spent at Epstein's residence and interactions involving high-profile contacts like Woody Allen and Naomi Campbell. Some communications referenced in these files also indicate coordination of meetings and logistics during that trip, which critics argue conflicts with the narrative of a brief, purpose-driven visit. However, it's important to note that while these documents raise serious credibility questions and have intensified scrutiny of Andrew's past statements, interpretations of them remain contested, and they do not by themselves constitute a formal legal finding that he deliberately lied, though they significantly deepen doubts about the accuracy of his version of events. It's important to slow this down, because this is exactly where speculation can start to outrun what's actually been proven. Names like Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres have circulated online in connection with Epstein-related discussions, but there is no verified evidence tying either of them to Epstein's criminal activity, and no credible legal findings or charges supporting those accusations. Being mentioned in documents, contact lists, or even social contexts is not the same as involvement in wrongdoing. Many public figures appeared in Epstein's orbit without being accused of crimes. The idea that silence equals guilt, or that not...
I know, but we have a congressional act now to requiring the release, but they're going to say, you know what?
Subject to
Tom
redaction.
Hanks, it's unfair that he was mentioned because he was eating Skittles.
Subject to redaction. Subject to redaction.
And we all know what that means. That's to protect.
That's why I'm saying you will never be satisfied with what's released.
Filing a defamation lawsuit implies someone to hide is also not reliable. Legal strategy varies widely, and many high-profile individuals choose not to litigate because lawsuits can amplify claims, drag out media cycles, and create exactly the kind of prolonged exposure they want to avoid, regardless of innocence. So while the files have raised legitimate questions about some figures, like Prince Andrew, extending that logic to others without solid evidence risks turning a real accountability issue into an unproven accusation, which ultimately muddies rather than clarifies the truth. The Epstein files do raise real and serious questions about power, accountability, and credibility, especially in cases like Prince Andrew, where documented contradictions have damaged public trust. But extending that same certainty of figures like Oprah Winfrey and Ellen DeGeneres is not supported by verified evidence. Fact-checking of the released materials shows that while famous names can appear in documents or online discussions, those mentions do not establish involvement in crimes, and